Hello. So today I'm going to be talking about the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is a series of sci-fi, political, and military drama, I guess would be the best way to describe it. It kind of has a little bit of everything. There's some psychological drama, there's some spy and espionage drama, there's some sci-fi, ships blowing up in space. The series has a little bit of everything. So, normally I would tell you what the first book in the series is and how many books there are. But this is a really weird situation. There's a lot of debate over the series of what even the first book is. For whatever reason, the publication order is not necessarily the order you're supposed to read them in. So like if you go to Goodreads, it'll say publication number 1, series number 4, or something like that. And so it's really, really hard to determine what book is actually the first book in the series and what specifically the order is. However, I will say it doesn't really matter with this series. The books, you want to read them kind of generally in the order that she wrote them in, but it's not a big, long, continuous story. There are things that build on each other over time, and characters that come back and stuff. So if you're reading like the very last book first, you might not be able to follow along so well, but it's not, if you read 2, you flip 2 or something, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's also hard to tell. Well, okay, so generally speaking, most people agree that the first book is Shards of Honor. And the reason that that's a first book, where most people were like, yeah, that's the first book, is because it's actually a prequel. So it for sure definitely takes place first. Now, it was written second. It wasn't actually the first book she published. So there's debate on it. Well, it's not actually the first book that was published, but I can't tell you what order to read them in, because they're kind of all over the place. But that one definitely takes place first, so it's a good place to start. There's also debate over how many books are in the series, because there's a bunch of books that she wrote that take place in the world that have nothing to do with the main characters at all. Like, they're not mentioned at all. They're just on it. It's a book that takes place on a planet in this system, and the entire time, so I can't really tell you how many books there are either, because it's like, well, do you count those books? Do you not? So all I can tell you is even if you don't count those books, there's a bunch of books. You will have, if you like the series, you will have a lot to read. You can read the side books, you can skip the side books. It's totally up to you. But either way, there's a lot to read. So let's start with pacing. These books are they're a little bit more measured in their pacing, because she does a great job of world building. So it takes a little bit longer for stuff to get going, but there's really vivid world building. She does a phenomenal job of that. And not just like, hey, here's what this planet is like, but there is really intricate political tensions going on, and that lays the groundwork for the political intrigue and the espionage and stuff that's in later books. So there's the world building of the actual worlds, and then there's the world building of getting all of this political structure down so that you can understand what's going on when the poo hits the fan later in the series. So they are a little bit more measured in their pace, but the pacing does build as you get through the books, because there's always some sort of culminating major disaster that has to be averted. And the books are super engrossing. I guess if you're not interested in world building at all, it's going to be real boring. So these probably aren't for you, because there's a lot of that to read through. But if you enjoy good world building, she does a really good job. It's like just the right amount of detail. She also does a good job of kind of pacing out how she does it. So there'll be like one chapter where it's, here's what this new space station is like, and then in the next chapter something will blow up or whatever. So it's not just like, oh my gosh, I've been reading her description of this space station for the last 100 pages and I'm over it. So she does a good job of kind of mediating that. For characterization, you follow Miles through, I don't even know how much of his life, but you follow him from when he's like 13 or something through adulthood. And so it's good characterization because you get to watch him grow up. And you are in his head for a lot of the books. So you really get to know him a lot. And there's, like I said, there's all these other characters that are involved that come and go and then come back, and which is necessary for there to be good intrigue. These are intrigue books. And I think I described them as thrillers at the beginning. They're intrigue. I wouldn't call them thrillers per se. But so there's a lot of really detailed characters. The terms I've written down here are detailed, eccentric, vivid, well-developed, dramatic, and introspective. And introspective is really important. He spends a lot of the books really wrestling with these life and death decisions he has to make that involve other people's lives. And he's not always comfortable with the decisions that he has to, the conclusions he has to come to. So there's a lot of him just really wrestling with demons of, I'm doing these spy missions and my friend died, or I, sent this battalion out and only half of them came back and that's on me. And so I feel like that's really realistic. The situations he's in are, we're talking about political intrigue on a world that doesn't exist, but there are situations he finds himself in and then has to deal with, and he's not always comfortable with the situation or how he deals with it, but it is what it is. And so that's really interesting to watch him go through. So there's a lot of that too. So that's why I said there's a little bit of everything. There's like psychological intrigue, there's political intrigue, there's military stuff. There's one of the books just takes place on a space station it's a science station. And it was I can't remember. It was like generating people or something. So like science fiction, not just, well, it's science fiction because it takes place in space, but this is actually dealing with like futuristic science and what the ramifications of that would be. And then there's, really vivid characters, really introspective. Miles is, he's the one we follow. So I can't say the other ones are per se introspective, but he does interact with them and he has some advisors that he really leans on and they can get introspective too. The storylines are, I feel like I've touched on, they're psychological, they're political, they're science fiction, and they're really thought-provoking. Like, I've left a lot of the books thinking, I don't know that I could have made the decision he made and been able to walk away from that. And I think that's the sign of a good book for you. Again, I'm not here to judge if a book is a good book empirically. I'm here to, a good book is a good book for you if you walk away from it and you can't stop thinking about it. And I really thought about these for a long time. So the frame and the tone, the frame would be this elaborate system of planets that Lois McMaster Bujold has put together. And you meet several of these planets. Some of the books take place purely in space. Some of them are on different planets. So it's kind of all over the place, but it's almost exclusively. There is one book that takes place at least partially on Earth, but even Earth is like unrecognizable to us today. So, she does a good job of like a really detailed background The tone of the books, and again, this is they're so different, some of them, but in general for the series, I would say the tone is really like suspenseful and detailed and kind of gritty sometimes. There's not a lot of really explicit violence. You know what ends up happening to people, but she doesn't go into gory details. So, but it's gritty in that these are situations where a lot of people end up not coming back from, if that makes sense. So, it's very realistic for it being, war more or less in the future. And what that looks like in terms of decisions that need to be made and lives that are lost. So, these are done on audiobook as well as print, obviously, and the audiobooks are solid. I highly recommend. I personally find that with denser books, I have way more success getting through them if I'm listening an audiobook. So if you're someone who's like, that sounds like too much for me, give the audiobook a try. You might find you really like it. And the narrator does a good job. There have definitely been narrators that I have been like, I will never listen to that again. But no, he does a really good job. So I highly recommend the audiobook. I don't think I've actually read any of these. I think I've exclusively listened to them. So, so that's the Vorkosigan Saga. Highly recommend if any of those things sounded interesting to you. If not, it's a lot of reading to do. So if that's not something that you're interested in, these things, then probably not for you. Yeah, so that's the Vorkosigan Saga. If that sounded interesting to you, check it out. Shards of Honor would be my best bet for you for the first book. It is a prequel, so I will just say the characters are a little bit different, and it's like how everyone meets. So it's not, it's a little bit different in feel than the rest of the books because it's just a setup book. But the writing, the tone of the writing and the world building and stuff is really reminiscent of the rest of the series. So if you like that part, you should be good for the rest of the books. So, all right, until next time, happy reading, everybody.